good evening everyone, and welcome to the fifth and final in a series of webinars that the STUC have been holding about the future of our economy. My name's Kat Boyd. I'm the Acting Scottish Secretary of the Public and Commercial Services Trade Union, and I'm also a member of the STUC's Organising group. So my union, the PCS, is the biggest trade union representing civil servants and related public sector workers across every region and nation in the UK. We represent the staff in the Department for Work and Pensions who have been working tirelessly throughout the pandemic to make sure that those millions of universal credit applications are processed. We also represent workers in the new Scottish Social Security Agency, and our union has always had a long-standing opposition to Tory policies on things like universal credit, and we work with claimant unions and community groups to fight for a better social security system. The STUC represents 40 unions, 20 trades councils, and 540,000 trade union members across Scotland. And the STUC's policy is democratically decided through decisions made at our annual Congress, but we also engage members in current debates and discussions about economy and about our society. And that's why these webinars have been really important, because they bring the discussion and debate live to anyone who wants it. These have been free events, and really they're looking at what the future holds for Scotland, because the coronavirus crisis has deepened the ruptures in our current social order, and it's exposed the failures of our systems. The remnants of our welfare state have been cut to the bone and privatised, and we now see on the horizon, and it's happening now, but on the horizon there are thousands of redundancies as job cuts begin to hit hard. So tonight we have, as our final part of this webinar series, a really important discussion, and we're joined by three speakers who are going to address the topics of social security and the labour market with some bright ideas that hopefully will spark some debate and discussion about the future of social security and the labour market in Scotland and beyond. So I'm really delighted to introduce our speakers this evening. First tonight we have Paul Vaughn. He is Head of Communities and Neighbourhoods at Fife Council and was a member of the Citizens Basic Income Feasibility Study Steering Group. Over the past 2 years, the group have explored the feasibility of a Scottish basic income pilot, and they published the report last month. Next, we'll hear from Kate Bell, who is the head of the TUC's Rights, International, Social and Economics Department. She's been at the forefront of the TUC's work pushing for job intervention and self-employment schemes, and has also been making the case for a meaningful job guarantee scheme. And finally, tonight we'll have Will Stronge. He is Autonomy's Director of Research. Autonomy is a progressive think tank formed in 2017, which focuses on the future of work. Will has written widely on the topic of a 4-day week, and with Helen Helster, he is currently writing Post-Work, a book to be published by Bloomsbury in 2021. So the format of tonight's webinar is that we will hear from each of our speakers in that order for between 5 and 10 minutes. After we've heard from the three speakers, there'll then be around 30 minutes for questions and answers. And we are aiming to finish no later than 7:15. One of our panelists, Kate, unfortunately has to leave at 7. So if you see her disappear, it's not because she's had enough, it's because she's got to go at 7, but we'll aim to finish no later than 7:15 so people can then get on with their evening. If you want to ask a question of any of the panelists, please post it in the Q&A chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen. And I'll do my best to make sure that that question goes to the right panelists or that it's answered by all of the panelists. So just post that in the Q&A chat box. We've, of course, got a hashtag for the event, so feel free to tweet about tonight's event using the hashtag Rebuilding Our Economy. Finally, I should say that this session is being recorded and the STUC will make it available online in the coming days. So, as I said before, we will have our first speaker for between 5 and 10 minutes. And we're going to hear from Paul Vaughn on the citizens' basic income. So over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Kat. What I'm just going to do, just give a very brief overview of the feasibility study report and what we found through the 2 years that we've been working on this. The report, I suppose, was led by Scottish local government, ourselves in Fife, alongside Glasgow, Edinburgh and North Ayrshire councils, and was ably supported by NHS Health Scotland and the Scottish Government and the Improvement Service. And it's really, I suppose, it's actually been a suite of 3 reports. But the sort of takeaway is that we, through that feasibility study, are recommending a preferred model for piloting basic income in Scotland. The model that we are looking at sticks as closely as possible to the sort of traditional model of a basic income, and that really is underlined by, I suppose, 5 key principles. First of all, that it's universal, so it's paid to all, and within our model we have a range of payment levels for certainly for the piloting of this that we would be looking at, but it would be not just for people who are of working age, but for younger folk as well as older folk. I think the second principle is that it's unconditional. It would be paid to all. There's no reason to, no conditions attached to what you can do with that funds. No reason for or any examples of why you would actually have to get it. It's unconditional. Paid to the individual, not to a family. Probably for minors, those for under 16, then likely to be paid to one of their guardians, parents, but principally it's an individual payment. It's periodic, so you don't get it all in one particular lump sum. It would be a regular payment that you'd be receiving, and that regular payment would be in cash. In the form of either into a bank account or in what we're actually doing. So that's the sort of principles that underlie many of the basic income models and what we've tried to build into the pilot model that we've proposed. The pilot would look at a sort of randomized control sample. We have looked at 2 different levels of basic income. One that's based on the Joseph Rowntree Foundation minimum income standard, and a lower level that's more closely aligned to the sort of benefits levels that exist at the moment within the UK system. We also have looked, though, at the fact that one of the criticisms that sometimes comes around a basic income is that it can't actually deal with all the complications that individuals have and the way that they actually want to live their lives. And so we've basically also looked at what is more commonly referred to as basic income plus, which would be that there would be a basic income, but there would still be top-ups available to deal with individuals and the challenges and that they face. And we've looked at that in terms of work capability around housing, around childcare, around disability, and incorporated that into the model that we would be looking to pilot. I think some of the outcomes that we would be looking for from any pilot is very much how it impacts on poverty and on child poverty, how it can impact on unemployment. And I think one of the things that's become probably more relevant over the last 4 months has been, well, how would this support health and well-being and the community level effects that you would expect maybe to see from the introduction of a basic income. And very much within the evaluation that we've designed within the feasibility study, these are all outcomes that we would be seeking to undertake. The feasibility model, or the pilot that we'd be proposing, would last for 3 years. There would be 3 areas, or at least 2 areas that would be covered by this, one with the lower level payment, one with the higher level payment, and a control group to test how things were actually changing between those different areas, so we could see what impact the basic income is actually having. Some of the things that we've addressed, I think, in the report are some of the challenges and some of the limitations that we think we can achieve through a pilot. Not all major ways or major policy changes are piloted, but we're suggesting that this is certainly one of the things that we want to address within that. We've addressed quite a number of ethical considerations within the document, and the full report can be seen at basicincome.scot. Some of the challenges we have are around how general you can actually take from some of the findings and how you could generalize those. There's limited roles to explore the sort of contextual effects in here, but the feasibility we've really been looking at has been looking at what the psychological feasibilities were, the behavioural feasibility, institutional, and the financial and economic feasibility. And I suppose those latter 2 are probably where a lot of people focus a lot of their attention, on the grounds that even within the piloting of the model, we're talking potentially a gross figure of around, for a 3-year pilot, of in the region of potentially £180 million. But that also institutionally, at the moment, it would be difficult to actually undertake a pilot in Scotland because of the way that the tax and benefit system is actually set up. And very early within the project, one of the pieces of work that you will also find on the website was a piece of work that the Child Poverty Action Group led for us, looking at the interaction of the current benefit system with a basic income. And I think when you have a look at that report, you will see the complexities and the difficulties that there are. And we understand from our conversations with DWP and with the HMRC that really to undertake this sort of pilot will require some primary legislation. So at the moment, the report has been endorsed by all 4 councils that were involved in the feasibility study, and has been presented to Scottish ministers, and there has already been letters written between Scottish Government and Westminster seeking support for ongoing work on this and for looking towards piloting it in Scotland. Okay, thanks.
Thanks very much, Paul. That was concise and comprehensive. So next up, we've got Kate Bell from the TUC.
Hi everyone, can you see me now? Thanks so much for having me at this event. It's really nice to be here with Scottish comrades and friends, and also really great to be having the opportunity to talk about some kind of inspirational thinking, I guess, amidst what has been a pretty gloomy picture in terms of jobs right now. So I'm going to talk about a jobs guarantee, and I'm going to cover what a jobs guarantee is, why we think it's a good idea, how the government's current plans measure up, and then very briefly, what else needs to happen alongside a jobs guarantee. So to kick off with, what is a jobs guarantee? Well, basically, it's that government offers people who've been unemployed, perhaps for a certain period of time, a guaranteed job, and the government funds the wages and associated costs of hiring that person, whether that's in the private, the voluntary, or the public sector. We published a set of proposals around this back in May, and we said that that job should last for 6 months, be paid at least the real living wage or the union negotiated rate for the job, and that it should be in sectors which either deliver a community benefit or move us towards decarbonisation. So that's the kind of basic idea of what it is, and happy to answer kind of more questions. So why do we think this is a good idea? Well, basically, when we face large-scale unemployment, as it looks like we may be about to do without significant government intervention, we can kind of think of that as a form of market failure. So it's not that there isn't work to be done. We know at the moment, for example, we need a huge amount of work done to decarbonise our economy. We know we need to expand public provision, whether that's social care or childcare. We know we need to build new homes, and there's many other social needs that we absolutely need to make. And I guess the aim of the job guarantee is to say that if the market at the moment isn't delivering jobs in the sectors where we know we need work, government should step in to match the number of people who want to work with those social needs. I think one of the questions that's kind of asked sometimes about this is, well, if you're going to fund a job guarantee, why don't you just give that money directly into workers' pockets? And I think there's a number of reasons for thinking that funding a job guarantee alongside social security, as I'll go on to say, is an important tool in what we might want to be arguing for as a labour movement. First, we know that work, if, and it's a really big if, it's good quality and well remunerated, can be good for people's mental and physical health. And that unemployment is often very bad for it. And that's partly because of the conditions of unemployment in terms of the very low levels of social security that people face. But we know that many people enjoy their work, they find meaning and purpose from it, and we want to give people the opportunity to do that. We also know that unemployment in the short term reduces your chances of getting a job in the long term. So we have a kind of horrific experiment in the 80s where we had long-term unemployment, and we know that spells of unemployment when you're young reduced your chance of getting a job in the longer term, and it also reduced your chance of getting a good job. But I think the third reason is that we know that there is kind of work that needs to be done, as I've set out, and collective forms of provision and organisation of that work. And perhaps, some of the most inspiring examples of that is kind of Roosevelt's New Deal in America, which included public art projects, infrastructure projects, projects which were putting people to work to do useful things, can really only be organised collectively and organised by government. And we think that's why it's vital that government is playing a role in saying there is work that needs to be done, and we want to make sure that people can actually have the opportunity to take up that work. Lastly, we know these kind of programmes work. So the last Labour government piloted something or ran something called the Future Jobs Fund, which offered a form of jobs guarantee to young people. And we know that significantly increased their chances of finding work. It wasn't without its problems, but it had a generally positive impact on the people who took part. So next thing I wanted to mention was, how do the government's plans currently match up to this? So you might know that government announced something called the Kickstart Scheme at the time of the summer statement, where they said that they would be offering a 6-month paid job to people who face long-term unemployment. And the brief answer to my question of how do the government's plans measure up is, we don't actually yet know, because we don't know very much more about what they've decided to deliver about that. But some things we do know. So bad things, it's not paid at a real living wage, and they haven't said anything about the union negotiated rate of the job. And so at minimum wage, there is a real danger that these could be poor quality jobs. On the positive side, they have said they want them to be additional jobs, and they have said they want them to be jobs with training. We're yet to see how they'll deliver that. And then we haven't seen anything about what kind of jobs these are going to be. So are these jobs that deliver the good quality social care we need? Are those jobs in sectors which are driving the push to decarbonisation? Or are they going to be kind of replacing the existing low paid, often insecure jobs that we see today? We think, when we put out our proposals, we said there was a key role for trade unions and other actors to engage in this. So we know, for example, Kat's colleagues in PCS are absolutely vital in job centres, have the expertise to deliver good quality training and work placements. They need to be working with trade unions, they need to be working with local authorities, with devolved nations and regions, to make sure that these are jobs that are being delivered. That money that government is putting in is actually going in to deliver jobs in the sectors we want to see expand, rather than in sectors which may not have a long-term future. So a lot, I think, to play for there. We know the scheme won't be perfect. We know it could be more generous, but there is an opportunity to deliver a really good quality jobs programme. Lastly, I just wanted to mention what else we think needs to happen alongside this. And I think it's really important to emphasise that a jobs guarantee is not a substitute for decent social security. It's complementary to that. TUC's also called for a fundamental rethink of universal credit, an end to the current sanctions regime, a significant increase in universal credit, we've said to £260 a week, which is 80% of the real living wage, a significant increase in child benefit, an end to the kind of unfair, unjust and cruel two-child benefit levels, and the benefit cap, and at the moment a freeze on council tax and additional hardship plans to help people pay their debts. So a job guarantee isn't a kind of silver bullet on its own that is going to solve all the problems with our social security system or all the problems that those currently facing unemployment are dealing with. But we think it could be a really important role in showing that unemployment isn't inevitable. The government has a really important role in providing good and decent quality jobs, and that trade unions can play a fundamental role in delivering that. And I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Kate. That was really interesting as well. Just a reminder to everyone who is listening and watching that the Q&A box is open already. So if there's something that Paul has said or something that Kate has said that you are keen to ask, then you can fire it in there straight away. And that's before we even hear from our third and final speaker, Will. So if you do have a question to either Paul or Kate, then please do ask it in the Q&A box. So I'm going to bring in Will now from Autonomy to talk about the 4-day week. Will, over to you.
Thank you, Kat. Thanks for having me. It's my first time speaking at an STUC event, although not the first time speaking with some of the other panelists. It was nice to see you guys again. I'm going to speak briefly about the shorter working week or 4-day week in the 5 or 10 minutes that I have. And there are a number of really good reasons why a shorter working week should be an ambition for the labour movement and for our labour market. I'm going to talk about a few here, but I think the other reasons might come up in the Q&A. I'd be happy to answer some questions about other issues involved. I think the first and foremost, and I think I want to start with this, the reason why I think we should shorten the working week and have that as an ambition is basically that time is life. Time is essential for us to actualize our freedom, actualize what we want to do in life, our purpose, etc., etc. I think it's quite obvious, but we live to work, and we don't. We work to live. We don't live to work, and that's a really important argument that's been made time and time and again by the labour movement, whether it's the 1847 Factory Acts movement, where they tried to and successfully limited the working day to 10 hours a day, through to unions of today. So whether it's in Germany or in Ireland or in the UK, unions are fighting to reduce the working week because they recognise that it should be every worker's right to be able to have a life outside of work. So the first argument is really that time is freedom, and freedom is what everyone deserves to have, basically. Depending on, or let's say working time has been the key terrain of struggle within capitalism between workers and employers. I think this is why putting it back on the agenda is so important, so unions can fight for it. Now, I think the second reason why we should have a shorter working week is that our health and well-being it should be front and center when we talk about the labour market. Over 50% of all sick days taken in the UK are due to work-related stress, anxiety, or depression. And the single largest reason for this stress, anxiety, and depression, according to the government's own figures, is workload pressure. So we live in an overworked economy. Work is actively making us sick. The amount of work that we're doing. I think this is an issue which is not talked about enough. Aside from the general conversation about how work gives us meaning or purpose, that may be true in some cases, but also overwork is a problem across the board. So overwork is a problem we need to address, and shortening the working week is a really obviously a key way of doing that. Not just flexibility, not just working from home, but also just reducing the amount of hours. Another reason is environmental. It's an environmental reason. Sustainability. Working time across nations, particularly in the global north, is strongly correlated with carbon footprints. That's not just to do with commuting. So if you're going in 5 days a week, a lot of people still commute by car, not just public transport. So if you shorten the working week, if you have a 4-day full-time working week, you take away a lot of those carbon emissions coming from commuting, but also the carbon intensive goods that go along around work. So that's things like bottled water, that's things like ready meals. These are carbon intensive goods that come from a very work centered lifestyle, and we need to meet our carbon budget the goals set within planetary limits, and to do that, working time is a really important policy instrument for us to do that. So when we talk about a Green New Deal or degrowth or post-growth, it's not a coincidence that working time reduction is part of those plans. A final reason, and I think this one is slightly more speculative, but nonetheless really, really important if we look through history, is a debate around automation and machine learning and AI. Now, I don't believe that the jobs apocalypse is on its way, but automation doesn't really work like that. Automation technologies have been used throughout history, and it's not just about replacing jobs, but it's about speeding jobs up. It's about hollowing out certain kinds of jobs and creating smaller, creating lower income jobs, more precarious jobs. Technology does all these things, and it's important for us as trade unionists or us as policy experts to make sure that our labour market and the technologies that come onto the market, the automation technologies, are also used for the benefit of workers. Now, an obvious link there would be that when automation technologies speed up the work process, workers should make the demand, or should have every right within their rights to demand that, okay, you're going to introduce automation technologies into our workplace, but we want to have shorter working weeks. The employer is more productive, but workers also benefit from there being more technology in the workplace. And this is exactly why the Communication Workers Union, the CWU, has bargained for a 4-hour reduction of the working week over a 4-year period with the employer Royal Mail. So we're seeing shorter working week agreements in trade unions today based on automation in the workplace. I think that's an important demand and policy that should be in place going forward, particularly as AI and machine learning advances. Now, I think I'm interested to get involved in the Q&A, so I think I'll end by basically saying that it was 82 years ago that Roosevelt inaugurated the New Deal, the original New Deal. And part of that was the Vaughan Act, where they reduced the working week to 44 hours and then ultimately 40 hours in the US. And this became normalized across the world, partly through trade union negotiation, but also policymakers following suit. That was 82 years ago. Still in the UK, on average, according to the Lord Skidelsky's report from last year, we're working 42 hours a week on average. So in 82 years, we haven't really moved past that important progress that was made back in Roosevelt's time. So I think going forward, and this is why I'm very pleased that the TUC has also called for a shorter working week as an ambition for the labour movement. We have to do better and be more ambitious in our scope and our targets for reducing the working week to improve the lives of workers in this country. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Will. I enjoyed that immensely. The 4-day working week, or the shorter working week rather, is one of the key demands for the PCS union for our members in the Scottish Government Civil Service. And I really like that you reminded us of the role that technology is playing in changing the way that people work, and that if technology and automation is going to make work more productive and going to increase productivity, then workers need to share in the benefits of that. And one way very easily that workers can share in the benefits of increased productivity is to have more time off. Time is freedom, as you said. So thank you very much for that, Will. We've now heard from our 3 speakers tonight, and we've got a couple of questions in already. I will say, just give a quick shout out here to Chris Stevens, MP. He is the chair of the PCS parliamentary group and has done lots of work in the area of social security for PCS and on behalf of members. He's messaged our chat to say that the DWP Select Committee will be looking at the issue of universal basic income in October, and there's already been about 20,000 submissions from members of the public. So thanks for that information, Chris, and it's really good to have you joining us tonight. So the first question we have is from Gary, which is, what happens to social welfare benefits under a UBI system? How does the system tackle wealth distribution as opposed to entrench it by not tackling the underlying causes of inequality? So with that question, I'm going to ask Paul to answer first, but then I'll also bring Kate in, and Will, if you also want to answer then just indicate and we can bring you in. But I'm going to over to Paul first for that one.
Okay, thanks. I probably want to start off with sort of like splitting this in two, because there are actually probably, I'll be bold and say there are probably no universal basic income systems in the world that really are sort of covering the way that, you know, that we are actually planning on doing this. Many of the systems, or many of the ideas that you'll have heard about, even the most recent one, I think, that's happening in Spain at the moment, are not necessarily looking at the whole sort of traditional basic income model. And I think within this, there's probably there are numerous ways that this could work. If it was to be rolled out, then it would be very much in terms of the design of that particular model as to how it would interact between benefits, existing social welfare, and a tax system. There are examples. I see some of the people who are attending tonight who could probably speak better to this than me, about how you could use the tax system to certainly claim some of those the universal basic income back, so that it was, you know, being targeted. And as I said earlier, one of the things that we were much more interested in was very much that basic income plus model. So recognizing that there are individuals who have special needs and requirements that needs to be tackled outside of the basic income model, with the idea that the basic income is just there to provide a very basic support, a basic level of income for anybody within society. In the piloting of this, we looked quite closely at how we would have to manage the interaction with the benefits system, and it's not easy. The principle that we were trying to work to all the way through was a principle of no detriment within any pilot, but it's actually very difficult to guarantee that unless you're actually just going to put the basic income as an additional payment over and above whatever individuals are actually receiving at the moment. And that's certainly possible, and certainly one mechanism to do that in terms of the pilot. We were interested to see, well, what could we do in terms of supporting those with the additional support that they were requiring, but equally looking at how certain benefits we might actually look in a pilot area to switch them off for the people who were actually participating. And to use the basic income as the mechanism by which they were actually receiving that support. So if you have a look in the main report, it has a full list of those benefits which we said needed to stay, and those that we felt we could actually switch off, because that would be the role that some of the basic income was potentially playing. We also wanted to look at what the interaction would be in terms of any means tested benefits that existed in the system at the moment, and very much saying that, you know, the basic income should be disregarded for any of those particular actions. But in the modelling that we did around the economic impact of introduction of a basic income across the whole of the Scottish economy, we included the basic income within a taxable income requirement in terms of how we actually did that. And those are the economic modelling, while limited, because you can only do so much within the economic modelling, did point to some of the things that one would have to consider in terms of the financing and the interaction with a tax system. And how you would actually, if you were only using tax as a mechanism to actually fund this, what some of the impacts of that would look like. But you'll have seen today that, you know, there are other ideas of sovereign wealth funds getting talked about. That's similar to a model that exists within Alaska, and an income that's paid to all Alaskans that's based on the sovereign wealth fund, similar to an Iranian model as well. And at the moment, those are things that we didn't explore in huge depth within the feasibility study, but certainly wanted to comment on, because the introduction of a basic income still has a fairly large economic impact on a country, and allows, you know, and therefore has to be paid for in a particular in some fashion, but we didn't make any strong recommendation about how we would do that. So this is a test. We would be testing certain aspects of it. Any particular rollout, any particular broader model, there are many options that could be explored in terms of how the benefits and tax system would interact.
Thanks, Paul. Kate?
Sure. So just really briefly on this, and I can't resist answering, so apologies, but I think like when thinking about kind of social security, I always think it's helpful to think about 3 different things the social security system is currently trying to do. So one of them is kind of insure you against when you lose your job or when you fall sick or when you retire, basically. So you stop earning income from the labour market and you need to replace it. And one of the reasons our current system is so broken, I think, is because we've stopped doing that form of insurance. So sick pay, for example, is one of the lowest levels in Europe, and it doesn't protect you when you fall out of work. There's another really important function, which is meeting extra costs, and those are normally costs imposed by society. So whether that's the costs of having children or the costs of living with a disability that society has imposed on people. And that's where I think a universal basic income can't really, or possibly the cost of housing, which is again because we don't have enough social housing, but that's where I think the universal basic income struggles most to kind of interact with. And there's this third really important role, which is of course redistribution, as the questioner put really clearly, and I think that's where universal basic income has got the most potential. But one of the things I think we could sometimes spend more time concentrating on when we talk about universal basic income is how to make that case for redistribution. We've seen over £30 billion taken out of the social security system over the last decade. We've seen consistent attempts to undermine anyone on benefits from basically believing that they should have the right to any form of income at all. And sometimes like a universal basic income is really, really complicated, but I really hope we can use it as a means to make the case for greater redistribution, to recognise that many people have too much and many people have too little, and that's really where the focus of the debate can go, because it's so urgent right now.
Thanks, Kate. And Will?
Yeah, no, I'll make a very small point. I think Kate's quite right that the redistribution element needs to be emphasised, and I'm sure Paul agrees with us on that. I think there's one point, just to answer the question Gary asked about inequality. I think inequality is not just about redistribution of resources, although I think, first and foremost it is that. It's also about inequality and as a kind of cultural, let's say, perceived terms as well. So one of the most vicious aspects of a targeted benefit system, which is only for those who claim or and so on, who have a certain amount of conditionality, is that it's very easy for, let's say, the press or for certain elements of the political spectrum to basically target that group of claimants, or and basically say, use such discourses like skivers, scroungers, etc. That's a horrible discourse, which effectively, as Kate says, discourages people from claiming they have the support they need, and also stigmatizes that element of the population. And as the various research from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation through to Resolution Foundation has showed, more and more people are going through the churn, not just because of COVID, but before COVID, of low pay and no pay cycles. So more and more of us are going through the social security system at some point or other, and therefore a more universal, unconditional system is one which can actually help attack that kind of stigmatization. And I think that's better for inequality in terms of in terms of a cultural inequality. I think it's important alongside the material inequality. I think that's often not talked about, that the only way that unemployment is so stigmatized because its constituency is actually much smaller than those who throw mud at them, basically.
Thank you. Now, there's a number of questions that have come in about the job guarantee scheme, Kate. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and bring them together and let you answer, because I'm aware that you've got to leave us at 7. And then Will and Paul, if you want to come in after Kate's had a chance to address some of these questions. So we've got a question from Matthew, who is asking, how will trade unions ensure that temporary jobs created actually do contribute a just and green recovery and don't just subsidise employers? how do we make sure we get investment going alongside the labour which the state will pay for? There's a similar question which is about if the government is planning jobs, and this is from Emma, if the government is planning jobs, should they not fund them in our public services first and foremost? And there was another one on the job guarantee scheme from Michelle, which is Michelle saying that she's got some concerns about a placement of 6 months isn't long enough to make a job or placement meaningful. What happens after 6 months? Is there support after, or is it just a temporary fix? So I think that I'm trying to just bring them together for you and give it to you, Kate, to answer first, and then bring the others in. Okay.
Brilliant. Thanks. And those are really good questions. And I guess one of the things I should have said at the beginning is, and I kind of talked a bit about what more we want on social security, but I didn't talk nearly enough about what else we're thinking about in terms of kind of broader government investment. So absolutely, we need government investment in public services. We know even at the moment there's 100,000 unfulfilled vacancies in social care, there's 100,000 unfulfilled vacancies in the NHS, and that's even before meeting the level of need we have. Local government has experienced absolutely enormous cuts, as I'm sure everyone here knows, over the last decade, and we need those jobs back on a permanent basis. We also think we need infrastructure investment, which is delivering some of that just transition. So we set out a plan for how infrastructure investment could deliver 1.24, it's 85 billion pounds could deliver 1.24 million jobs over the next 2 years. And obviously not all construction jobs are permanent, but many of those jobs could lead to permanent employment. And that's in things like retrofitting, it's in the electrification of transport. So those are plans for permanent long-term jobs. But what the job guarantee does is provide a kind of specific backstop for those who might be facing unemployment and who wouldn't necessarily have the skills to get into those jobs immediately. And it's really important that those are additional jobs, that it's not being used to subsidise employers taking on people who they would have taken on otherwise, and that they're good quality jobs with training. And that's the point about the kind of 6 months. This should be an intense period where someone is paid to be doing a real job, but they're also being trained at the same time, not just put into a kind of rubbish, I was trying to think of a polite word there, a rubbish job basically on kind of lower terms and conditions. And I think there's that's why the kind of trade union involvement is so important, to check that the jobs are additional, to check that they have real training involved, and to check that they're meaningful too, and they're actually delivering a benefit to the local community. I just noticed another question in the chat, which I thought I'd just pick up on, because I thought it was an interesting question, which is, how do these kind of jobs actually help the precariat? Do they just kind of encourage people into more poor quality work? Absolutely not. We think often high levels of unemployment accompany an increase in insecure work as people become kind of more desperate fundamentally to take on jobs under poor terms and conditions. And this is trying to provide an alternative to that desperation by saying, no, look, here is a series of good quality, decent jobs with training, so that you're not facing the choice between an inadequate level of social security and perhaps a job on a 0 hours contract, which after the last financial crisis is what really kind of led to the pretty horrible labour market we've got now, where many people saw their social security benefits being cut, and at the same time were only able to take on jobs on poor terms and conditions, on low pay, on 0 hours contracts. We're trying to set out an alternative model where we say we have a decent social security system, so you're not forced into unsuccessful work, and at the same time government is funding decent quality jobs on good terms and conditions that offer real training.
Thanks, Kate. And just on that last question that you picked up on the chat, I do want to put that to our other panelists as well, so Paul and Will, and for people who are watching and listening. It's a question that's come in from Mike, and he's asked, how do UBI, the jobs guarantee and the shorter working week help to protect the precariat, or those in precarious work, from further exploitation, as each of these things encourages more people into the labour market than depressing wages? So I want to open that up to Paul and Will as well, because I think it's a really good question that's worthy of an answer. So, Will?
So I think we should avoid this idea that basically the more workers who are in work, wages will get depressed necessarily. That I don't think that's necessarily true. I think basically wage levels are the product not only of simply numbers in and out of the labour market, but also the strength of the labour movement and the strength of worker voice. And so it's not just the case that, you know, if you have a jobs guarantee or a shorter working week and we create more jobs, that wages necessarily go down. That is a logic which is often used, particularly by free market economists. I think it's false. It's been proven false. So I think let's avoid that. And I think, but to answer the question about how do the shorter working week speak to the precariat, well, I think, you know, we should be clear, just as Kate spoke of the jobs guarantee, and also I think it's true of the basic income, that these aren't silver bullets for all of the problems of the labour market, although they each help it in some sense. Now, I think for the precariat, there are policies such as banning 0-hours contracts, having decent kind of exclusive or like targeted rights for those who are bogusly self-employed, speeding up tribunal processes. All these things are really important for helping the precariat. But I think, as I think Kate was alluding to, if you create a stronger labour market, one where there are good terms and conditions, decent pay and decent working hours, which includes shorter working hours, then those, by creating jobs such as these, then those in the precariat who are involuntarily self-employed or involuntarily in bad jobs, obviously who would be voluntarily be in a bad job, it creates better conditions for them to go into other work, therefore strengthen their position as well as the labour market in general. So I think shorter working hours and job creation schemes, whether that's a job guarantee or otherwise, actually help the precariat by giving better options, basically. If the only thing they can find is a bad job at the moment, then let's create a better labour market.
Thanks, Will. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an interesting one because it's argued both ways within basic income, that you're either going to see basic income depressing wages or you're going to see basic income increasing wages. So, you know, both arguments are made by those who either want to support or contradict the particular model. I think we relied on looking at some of the evidence that actually exists in a fairly major literature review. There is very little evidence showing sort of negative impacts on the labour market from the introduction of a basic income, even in some of the sort of models that have been done. What it does seem to do is support the choice of the individual as to how they actually want to work, the length of time they want to actually work, and how they actually then distribute their time between work, between family, between community, in terms of what they're doing. So definitely a promotion of sort of the support that's actually necessary to actually undertake the work that the individual wants to do and to live the lives that they're actually after. So that would be certainly, I think, some of the evidence that we've got, but certainly something that we'd be wanting to test in the piloting of basic income.
Thanks very much, Paul. Now I've got a couple of questions coming in on the 4-day week. So we've got one from Alan here, where he says, COVID has shown that work can be delivered more flexibly to the benefit of workers who are office-based. Are there any suggestions how we could learn from that experience, including negotiations at a sector level and additional training for IT, and maybe the first step to then negotiating a 4-day week? We've got a point from Emma, who's involved in campaigns for a 4-day week, where she says there's a fear amongst public services that they think there might be a bit of a public backlash to the idea, and consequently a governmental backlash if it's introduced. How do we counter that type of backlash? And also another question from Michelle, who says, do you think employers would be more likely to support a 4-day working week now they can see the potential savings / benefits that can be made from staff working at home during lockdown? So, I mean, they're really around the 4-day working week, but I mean, again, they're open to all panelists. Kate, I know you've got to go in about 5 minutes, so I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. So over to you, and then I'll bring in our other 2 panelists as well.
Sure, thank you. So really briefly on the point about public sector on a 4-day week, it reminds me of, I went to talk to some Unison activists around the trade union movement's kind of campaign around a 4-day week, and they all just looked at me as if I was a bit odd, basically, and they were like, do you know how many days over our current agreed working hours we're currently working? You know, you're living, and heard some kind of pretty horrific experiences of kind of overwork that public sector workers had been put under due to the lack of funding of public services. And I think it's, from the kind of union movement's perspective, it's always really important to say this is a 4-day week with decent funding for our public services, with the idea that there would be the resource there to deliver additional work and with no loss of pay. And I think, you know, whenever the union movement talks about a 4-day week, it's really important we say with no loss of pay, because that's absolutely vital. I think it's a really interesting point about IT, and I think there's a kind of, I sort of got two slightly competing perspectives on this. So one is that kind of the pandemic has been, you know, exposed some things which many people have been saying were impossible, actually being possible very, very quickly. So many disabled activists, for example, have pointed out that for them, they've been asking for more meetings to be held on Zoom to enable better participation for a really, really long time. And suddenly it's become possible because it's been necessary for everybody. And I think that's really important. But I think it's also exposed the kind of really huge difference in experiences between those of us like me, who've been able to work from, you know, a room in my house throughout this, and those who've continued going out to work during the crisis. And most of us will actually have different experiences in our own workplaces as well. So I'm very conscious that at the TUC, you know, there are still people going in to clean our building or to make sure it's kept safe. And I think one of the things we have to think about doing is means of kind of building solidarity between those groups of workers to show that how that increased flexibility can benefit those who really need to benefit from it, but bearing in mind what has been the experience of people who haven't benefited from that increased flexibility, and how we kind of avoid a kind of two-tier workforce, for want of a better word, where there's a kind of privileged group who can work from their own bedrooms, from their own houses, and a group who continue to go out to keep our essential services running. And that's, I don't have the answers to that question, but I think it's something we as a labour movement really need to be thinking about. So would welcome any contributions. Finally, just to say, I'm really sorry I have to go at 7. It's just bad organisation on my part. And thanks so much for having me, because I've really enjoyed it and they're great questions. It's been nice to listen to the other panellists too.
Thanks very much, Kate, and thanks for your contribution. I think you make a really important point there about the dangers of a two-tier workforce, and that you have a group of workers who are working from home and other workers for the same employer who are on the front line. I think the discussions that I've been having with comrades in the labour movement is that, you know, working from home during a pandemic is not the same type of working from home as it would have been this time last year, or even in January or February. It's not a perk for a lot of people. It's actually very difficult, especially if you've got wee kids about, or, you know, you live in a 1-bedroom or a 1-room flat and you're working on the edge of your bed. That working from home during a global pandemic is actually, it's a civic duty, it's a responsibility, and that moving forward we have to think of a more balanced settlement that benefits all workers and doesn't divide people on that basis. So thank you so much for your contribution. It's been really, really interesting. It's nice to meet you again. So we've still got some time for our other, I think there's another 2 questions in the chat. If people are, you know, still quite keen to ask a question, then there's still some time if you've got something quickly. We've got a question that's come in from Rosa, and her question is directed to Paul, and she's asking, have you looked at the Finnish model on UBI? And if so, has it helped to increase wages? So Paul, that's directly to you.
Yeah.
But just let me...
on Monday, I was part of a panel with Ollie, who's been leading the evaluation of the Finnish work in Finland. You know, he would be able to speak very clearly to this. We've been following it very closely. we've been across, some of us that were involved in the steering group, to actually see what was happening, and have been watching the evaluation that's coming out. The issue in Finland was that the model was a random sample of 2,000 individuals who were unemployed at that particular moment in time, and therefore you can't really tell what if there's been any impact, I think, really on in terms of how if it's had any impact on the increase of wages. The pilot lasted for 2 years. And as I said, it was the 2,000 people. The interesting thing, I think, that's coming out much more strongly with the Finnish model is the impact it had on people's health and well-being, and on their ability to make these choices and to feel that they were in control of how they were living their lives. I think what you would really be needing to look at is a much longer, much broader pilot to see what impact there would be on wages. It also, if you have a look at the feasibility study and have a look at the economic modelling that the Fraser of Allender Institute did for us, you will find that it's very difficult to model the impact on wages, and very much dependent on how you choose to make assumptions about how the labour market will operate when a basic income is introduced, and whether you believe that folk will accept that the basic income is there, and the potential impact that it has on folks' tax, and therefore there's actually quite a positive and a big beneficial impact to it, or if you believe that there then becomes a sort of bidding up of wages within the model, and that's all contextual in terms of where you're actually introducing it and how you're introducing it. So in terms of the specifics of Finland, I'm not totally aware that there was any look at the wages. What is coming out is very strong around the health and well-being aspects of the Finnish model, and the modelling that we've got would give a bit more detail on what we've looked at so far.
Thanks, Paul. I just am going to bring in Will now to return to our questions on the 4-day working week that Kate's given us some answers to. So Will, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. No, I'll be very, very quick. I just think it's important to note that I'll try and run through the 3 questions very, very quickly. One, I think, yes, flexibility through COVID, the increased flexibility that some parts of the workforce have experienced, is a bit of a gateway to the discussion around the 4-day week. So I work for a think tank called Autonomy. We not only do research, but we also work with companies to transition their staff to shorter working weeks without a loss in pay. And we've seen an increase in discussions with all different aspects of the private sector, but also charity sector as well, from big corporates through to small charities. That discussion around the 4-day week has been really spurred by the increased flexibility of COVID. So that's kind of flexibility that some parts of the workforce have had through COVID. So that's very interesting. We'll see where that goes, whether this actually leads to a broader, more powerful discussion. I think on the public sector question, we've costed what a public sector 4-day week would cost, even on very conservative estimates, and it's actually relatively little, less than 1% of the overall public spend. And that's because a public sector as employer will also get tax returns and national insurance contributions back once they increase the headcount in public sector organizations. So I would ask you to look to our website to see the costings on that. I think that's really a really important point to make, particularly when making the case to the public that this won't cost too much in the public sector. On that, recent polling we've commissioned on public attitudes to 4-day week have been overwhelmingly positive. So around 63% of the British public want the government to explore a 4-day week as an option. And interestingly, along party lines between Labour voters and Conservative voters, both of them are over 50%, 57% Conservative voters, I think 67 or 69% of Labour voters. And we've broken that down with other parties as well. So I think, obviously the SNP are championing the 4-day week to some extent, or at least there's been talk, there's been some chatter. So I think the public appetite is there, and I think kind of the modelling, the costing, the research is coming through. I like to think we're trying to pioneer in that respect. Okay, I think that's what I'll say.
Thanks very much, Will. So we are at 7:05. We've had also in our Q&A chat box some feedback on your answers. And not that it was a test at all, but people are saying thank you for your answers. Mike has commented to say that your answers confirm that all 3 strategic interventions in this area are needed as part of a green recovery. So we've had some really good feedback already. I haven't had the chance to check Twitter as the meeting's been going on, but I expect we'll have some pretty good feedback there as well. So we'll bring the meeting to a close now. So thank you very much again, Will and Paul and Kate in her absence. As I said at the start, the session has been recorded, so it's going to be available over the next few days. And thanks to all of you who've tuned in tonight for joining our webinars, which have been going on for the last 5 weeks. The STUC will soon publish its report themed around reimagining, redesigning and rebuilding our economy, which follows on from some of the topics that have been discussed during the webinar series. So keep your eyes peeled for that coming out soon. You can also find information on all future events on the STUC's website. That's www.stuc.org.uk. And the STUC, you know, trade unions have to be at the forefront of technology as well. So the STUC is on Facebook and on Twitter. So I'll just finish by thanking everyone for joining us and for joining us during this series. And stay safe and see you all soon. Thanks. Good night.
Cheers. Bye.